Welcome to this session focused on the ways in which paraprofessionals can promote social interactions and academic engagement for students with autism and other developmental disabilities through thoughtful facilitation. Paraprofessionals can play such an important and impactful role within and beyond the classrooms as they help facilitate access to rigorous instruction and meaningful relationships. But like anyone else, they often need guidance and support to do this work well. Now, the roles of paraprofessionals in elementary and secondary schools can be pretty wide-ranging. Some work in special education settings, while others support inclusion. Some support groups of students, while others serve as one-to-one supports. They might be involved in assisting classroom teachers, supporting well-designed instruction, facilitating social connections, supporting the implementation of behavioral support plans, or assisting with the personal needs of students requiring extensive supports. Although their roles were initially intended to be ancillary, there's been some drift over time in the roles they assume. It's not unusual to observe them managing the curriculum or planning lessons, leading instruction, assigning student grades, or even communicating with parents. In other words, their roles can fall outside of appropriate job expectations. And so it's important to distinguish those roles that are and are not appropriate to paraprofessionals. Now, perhaps you've noticed this in your own school or district. Paraprofessionals have been increasingly prominent players in the education of students with more extensive support needs. So consider these data depicting the rapid rise in the use of paraprofessionals to support educational inclusion, particularly for students with disabilities. This figure shows almost 20 years of data on the number of paraprofessionals in the United States. Now, the purple line is the number of paraprofessional FTEs, whereas the blue line is the number of special education FTEs. So if you walk into a school, you are now much more likely to run into a paraprofessional than a certified special educator. And this model is increasingly requested by general educators, special educators, and parents. So what's the risk we run? On the one hand, we're assigning the least trained and often least paid staff to support the students with the greatest support needs. And there's just not good evidence that this approach gets us where we want to go, especially when it comes to belonging. So let's bring it down to the local level. In Michigan, the ratio of paraprofessionals to special educators is almost 1-to-1. So in our efforts to promote rigor and relevance and relationships, the roles of paraprofessionals can be especially powerful when approached well and with the right goals in mind. So that brings us to the purpose of this particular session. Through our time together, you will understand the contributions and complexities of using paraprofessionals to support inclusion. You'll recognize the importance of providing just enough support to students. You'll learn about effective strategies for facilitating academic and social engagement. You'll identify resources to share with paraprofessionals in your school. Now, I've organized this session around 6 key areas to guide your work with paraprofessionals: reflecting on prevailing supports, re-envisioning their roles, teaching facilitation strategies, adopting peer-mediated supports, focusing on fading, offering ongoing training, and a bonus would be on just thinking about how you supervise all of those things as well in terms of providing meaningful supervision. Now, these aren't necessarily linear. They're just examples of the kinds of ways you might guide your paraprofessionals. So the first of these areas involves reflecting on your prevailing practices, the ways you currently utilize paraprofessionals within and beyond the classroom, as well as the ways students with autism and other developmental disabilities are impacted by doing so. Now, here's a list of cautions outlined by Michael Giangreco, a leading expert in the area of paraprofessional utilization. And these are possibilities to notice, right? Situations to avoid. So as you observe students and staff, or you speak with students and staff, do you see circumstances in which the ways you are supporting students with disabilities is contributing to these unintended impacts, such as separating students from their classmates, promoting unnecessary dependence, interfering with peer interaction, creating insular relationships, contributing to feelings of stigmatization, limiting access to competent instruction, interfering with teacher engagement, or even provoking problem behaviors? And I'm reminded here of a series of cartoons also crafted by Michael Giangreco, who's at the University of Vermont, and they illustrate these issues probably much better than I could actually put into words. Within general education classrooms, we don't want to support students in ways that set them apart. They keep them on the peripheries of their classroom or somehow separate them from the opportunities to work alongside and interact with their peers. In one of our observational studies of high school classrooms that include students with intellectual disability, we found that students were sitting in close proximity to their peers just 40% of the time. The rest of the time, they're sitting right next to that paraprofessional. And why? Because sitting next to an adult all the time in class can actually hinder interactions with other kids. As children reach upper elementary and then middle school and high school, the constant presence of an adult just isn't very cool. And students turn to the paraprofessional to ask questions or get help rather than to their peers. And peers ask questions going through the paraprofessional rather than going straight to the student. And then there's this impact on learning and learned helplessness. When paraprofessionals provide too much rather than just enough support in that classroom, students with disabilities miss out on opportunities to learn skills themselves. And in an effort to promote success, we sometimes err on the side of just doing too much. So in these and in other ways, adults can unintentionally stand in the way of students accessing opportunities for independence and learning and relationships that so often abound within and beyond our classrooms. So you might be providing too much support when students with disabilities eat more with teachers than with peers, when they sit next to paraprofessionals rather than near classmates, when they name school staff as best friends rather than their peers, when they always interact with peers through paraprofessionals, when they're just not very well known by any other kids in that class or school, and on you can probably think of your own to add to this list. Now, you might discover the need to revisit the roles of paraprofessionals in and outside of the classroom at your school. So rather than serving as the primary or exclusive source of support or assistance for a student who has more extensive support needs, their role might be re-envisioned as one focused on facilitation. Someone who facilitates connections to peers, access to shared academic work, connections to classroom teachers, or just to the other social and learning opportunities within the school. Paraprofessionals should not be primary instructors. They're supports to classroom teachers. Indeed, rather than assigning paraprofessionals to individual students, it's actually recommended that they be assigned to teachers or to classrooms. Now, this all leads us to the use of effective facilitation strategies. Paraprofessionals should be shown how to facilitate connections to academic, social, and behavioral supports that come from their classmates, their teachers, and others in the school. Within inclusive classrooms and also other school settings, there's this abundance of opportunities for students with disabilities to learn with and from their peers, but they often need help accessing those opportunities. And that's really where paraprofessionals can be especially impactful. So let's consider what this might look like within an inclusive classroom in which a paraprofessional is also present to support the teacher and enrolled students with disabilities. There are so many avenues through which their connections or their actions can serve to promote those academic and social connections, through their physical proximity, through their advanced preparations, through the language they use, through the interactions they have, and again, many more examples that you can probably think of. Now, let me illustrate this with an example drawn from a study led by Matt Brock, who's a leading expert on inclusive practices. So special education teachers learned to teach their paraprofessionals how to supervise peer support arrangements and how to facilitate access to social interactions and academic engagement while they were doing so. And you can learn more about peer support arrangements in another session within this series. In other words, they made sure that peer partners were sitting close to their classmates with autism, that they prompted, reinforced, and provided information to students as needed, and that they checked in with peer partners often to see how things were going and to offer needed help. So the prompting, reinforcing, and providing of information are these facilitation strategies aimed at both social interactions and academic support. So let's focus first on social facilitation. Paraprofessionals should look for ways to prompt social interactions. And this involves encouraging or suggesting a way for the focal student to interact with a peer or a peer with the focal student. An example might be when a paraprofessional points to a symbol on an augmentative communication device to prompt the student with disabilities to answer a question from a classmate. But they should also reinforce social interactions. And that means praising the students or classmates for social interactions, whether that's verbally or with gestures, An example might be a paraprofessional just giving the student with disabilities like a thumbs up when he greets a classmate with his communication device. And finally, they should identify times when they should provide information for social interaction. And this involves sharing information with classmates that might help them to better interact with the student. It includes information about how the student communicates, interpreting their behavior, sharing their interests, or even just suggesting possible conversation topics. For example, a paraprofessional might say to a peer, hey, you know, when Dylan tries to stroke your hair, that's his way of trying to interact with you. Just let him know you don't like it, but you would love to give him a fist bump and walk with him or talk with him instead. So now let's turn to academic facilitation. It's the same sort of facilitative behaviors, but here focus more on promoting shared learning. So promoting academic support involves encouraging or suggesting a way for peers to work with the student to help them participate in class. For example, a paraprofessional might say to a peer, hey, you know, maybe after the lecture you could explain to Sarah in a few sentences what it was about. And they can also reinforce academic support, which involves praising peers for the way they're working with a student to help them participate in class. And an example might be a paraprofessional who says to a peer, hey, that was a really smart to think of helping Marty outline his paper so he could go back and fill in the information. And finally, paraprofessionals can provide information for academic support. And this entails providing information to peers so that they might better support the student. It includes information about the strengths and needs related to class participation, about accommodations and modifications or instructional strategies. And I think this framework of prompting, reinforcing, and providing information can be applied in so many individualized ways across a wide range of school settings. Now, let me present this in a bit of a different way by providing a more extended list of facilitation strategies. For example, paraprofessionals might model for peers how to initiate and extend conversations or show them how to converse with someone who has complex communication challenges. They might call attention to the interests, strengths, experiences, and things students with and without disabilities have in common. And they could also prompt a student's use of a particular social interaction strategy or help peers interpret any challenging or unusual behaviors exhibited by their classmate. They might redirect students' questions and comments away from the adults and to one another, or just ask additional questions ask additional peers to provide targeted or time-limited supports as needed. Or they might look for ways to create proximity when it's limited or inconsistent. All of these facilitation strategies can take place within the ongoing flow of the class, or paraprofessionals can connect with students immediately before or after class to share ideas. So here's what that might sound like if you were kind of eavesdropping in. You know, Jasmine would be better able to play this game if you'd show her how to match her cards. Or here's how you can help Abby program her communication device so that she can contribute to the group presentation. Or in the area of highlighting similarities, you know, you and Eric might want to compare your essays. It looks like each of you had pretty similar experiences. Or, wow, you both like electronic music? Alan's really into that. You ought to ask him about it. Or I overheard Monica say she always wanted to see that movie. Well, maybe you two could go together, go talk about that. Or strategies when identifying strengths. You know, it sure works great when everyone in the group is good at doing different things. How did each member help get your project done? Or, hey, you and Carlos might make great book report partners. You've got a talent for writing, and Carlos has a really talent for drawing. Together, I bet you'll end up with a super project. Or while teaching social interaction skills, you might say, hey, Randy, let's practice how you could call a friend on the phone and invite him to go to a movie. Or, you know, John's not looking. I don't think he heard you. You could ask again. Maybe make sure this time he sees you. Or what's another way you could ask Patrick to borrow his ruler? Or think about how you might interpret unusual or unexpected behaviors. These are just, again, some examples to get you thinking. You might say, hey, Mark, you talk aloud during math because it helps you think through equations, right? Or, hey, this is usually a sign Sarah's feeling a bit anxious. Here's what you could do as a result. Or, you know, hey, when Brett hits his hand on his desk, he's letting us know that he's frustrated. He's working hard to learn other ways to let people know what he's feeling. Or maybe there's some strategies you could use to redirect interactions from peers to students. For example, you might say, you know, if you want to know how Jack is doing, you ought to just ask him yourself. Just make sure he can see you when you ask. Or, hey, I don't know. He's sitting right over there. I bet he'd tell you if you asked him directly. And sometimes we have to redirect from paraprofessionals over to peers. So you might say to the student, well, why don't you see if you can get John to help you with this problem? Or, hey, I bet Anita might be willing to check to see if your answers are correct. Or just shrug your shoulders and go, I'm not really sure what you should do next. Why don't you ask your classmate about what the assignment is? And you also might just directly ask peers to help in certain circumstances, which is simply things like, hey, Mary, would you help Brian with his worksheet? Or, hey, if you could point to and read the question, he could keep his place and answer. Or, hey, would you be willing to be his partner and read aloud to him? And finally, there's just ways of increasing proximity, which is often a prerequisite in class for interactions. Saying things like, Brian, hey, why don't you go sit with your lab group? Or, the group's about to start and you're still all the way over here. Maybe you should be over there. Or, guys, I think you're missing someone. All of these are just kind of subtle ways of interjecting into ongoing situations, some of these ways to facilitate connections and shared learning. Now, all of the strategies I've shared can and should be embedded within peer-mediated interventions. Things like peer support arrangements or peer networks, recess-based peer partners, or other peer-to-peer celebrations and events and gatherings. Good adult facilitation is a core feature of all of those research-based approaches. So take peer support arrangements, for example, which, again, is covered in another session, but it's often a paraprofessional or a special educator who facilitates those connections among students and their peer partners and among students and that ongoing instruction. In one project, which I think may sound offensive to this Michigan audience, we involved having paraprofessionals use the PACKERS acronym as they facilitated peer interactions within the inclusive classroom. And this involved having paraprofessionals ensure students with disabilities remained in proximity to their peers, that they had access to their device, that they created multiple opportunities for students and peers to work together. They monitored and watched the students as they worked together. That they encouraged the students through various forms of praise, that they reduced or faded their support over time, and that they collected data or, we said, scored peer interactions. And of course, you can create your own acronym reflecting your favorite sports team. You don't have to do the Packers one if you don't want to. The point is, it's just really sort of engaging paraprofessionals and being very intentional about their facilitation roles. And of course, the adults who are facilitating peer networks will also have numerous opportunities to apply these strategies as that group of students and peers spend time together at lunch or on the playground or before or after school or as part of an extracurricular activity. And again, peer networks are also covered more fully in another session. You can learn more about those. Now, in her wonderful article on paraprofessional facilitation, Dr. Chung provides a checklist of facilitative strategies that could be used in various settings, like during peer network meetings. And she organized these strategies, many of which we've actually already touched on within these three areas of providing proximity of space and materials, of encouraging academic and social related interactions, and monitoring and praising the students and their peers. Now, as students and their peers become more confident and comfortable in their interactions, that's when paraprofessionals should be thinking about how to fade back, even gradually, their support so that students can participate more independently and meaningfully in class and school activities. This is the idea that we talk about of providing just enough support. And it really should be a forethought rather than an afterthought. Now, to kind of use this analogy of coaching, there may be times early on when that coach is in much closer proximity to a child, helping them acquire a new skill or approach things in a different way. But, they begin to step back as that child's building those skills. They're providing feedback as needed, stepping in when required, but eventually they remain on the sidelines as the child becomes more certain and confident. And there's something in that kind of image that I can think is helpful for us in this context. You see, there's this temptation in schools to start with the most intensive or intrusive supports first, and then trying to fade back those supports over time, moving from bottom to top. Now, you might remember these slides from the session I did on peer support arrangements, and I would, of course, instead encourage starting at the top and working your way down. If the student can do it on their own with the right technology or adaptations, if provided additional skill instruction or with self-monitoring strategies or management strategies or with the help from a peer, well, then the need for that close and constant presence of a paraprofessional might be unnecessary. Well, like any other staff person at your school, paraprofessionals are going to benefit from ongoing opportunities to learn new skills and gain new knowledge related to supporting students with disabilities. They don't usually come to this work with the same extensive training and knowledge that certified teachers receive. There will be constant learning in this process, and they're going to need good guidance from you on the practices that they should and they should not adopt, on the roles that they should and should not assume. To fold in one final cartoon for this session, paraprofessionals should not have to learn the ropes on their own. So set aside regular time to model new strategies and build new skills. Provide coaching and feedback to them in general education classrooms and in other school settings, and encourage their involvement in professional development opportunities related to their roles. Federal law requires that paraprofessionals be appropriately trained and supervised, which includes being supervised by a certified special education teacher. So paraprofessionals can be such important and such effective members of a student's educational team, and their roles in promoting inclusion and belonging can be life-changing for students with complex needs. But those roles often require regular reflection and occasional reimagining and refreshed training, all to ensure that they're having a positive impact on students. So as we close, remember to communicate the importance of their work with students and help them see their roles as one of facilitating social connections and academic engagement. Equip them to implement effective facilitation strategies and listen to their experiences and their insights all along the way. If you want to read more about facilitation strategies for paraprofessionals, I've put a few options up on the screen. The second of these resources is available for download at the link along with this session. And of course, the START website should be your go-to resource for all things peer-to-peer. Make sure to check out any readings and training opportunities that they offer on this topic as well. So thank you for being part of this session on paraprofessional facilitation strategies for promoting interaction and engagement. I hope it's brought you new insights into the roles that paraprofessionals can play in your own school as we all strive to promote learning and relationships for all of our students and to do that well in our schools.